on Prime Crime.
She says she's having trouble breathing. She said she was stabbed multiple times.
It's the attack on a young girl that left the nation stunned.
As the details became more apparent in our investigation, it's extremely disturbing.
Is a supernatural force to blame?
We think we see him sometimes. It didn't feel like anything. It was like air.
And what can happen next may surprise you.
She poses a significant risk of bodily harm to herself, others, or to property.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to Prime Crime. This is where we do a deeper dive into the most high-profile and memorable true crime cases. You know, there are a lot of motives to kill, but this one is unlike any other.
What's the address of your emergency?
WAUKESHA County, Lynn. I'm transferring over a caller on Big Bend.
May 31st, 2014, Waukesha, Wisconsin. A terrifying 911 phone call is about to start one of the strangest crime stories in modern American history.
Came upon a 12-year-old female. She appears to be stabbed.
She appears to be what?
Stabbed.
A man named Greg Steinberg is out bicycle riding when he discovers a young girl bleeding on the side of the road.
She says she's having trouble breathing. She said she was stabbed multiple times.
You know, the nature of this crime scene was particularly horrific. You know, our victim was stabbed in the arms and the legs and many times in the abdomen. There were 19 stabbing motions. I mean, the nature of this crime scene is just very, very violent.
The victim is Peyton Leitner. She'd been attacked in the nearby woods, but was able to muster up enough strength to crawl out.
She said she can take shallow breaths. She's alert.
And she didn't say who did this or how it happened?
I don't know if she wants to be talking. I started to ask her, and then...
That's okay.
Peyton is rushed to the hospital, where doctors frantically try to save her life. Miraculously, despite her extensive injuries, Peyton survives.
She missed death by millimeters. I mean, one of the stab wounds just barely missed her heart. Largely, she lived because those wounds were just shallow enough that she did not have a heart attack and die right there on the scene.
Hours later, police apprehend the assailants.
The suspects were located near I-94, where they were both taken into custody without incident.
The identity of the attackers turned out to be as shocking as the stabbing itself. Two 12-year-old girls, Morgan GEYSER and ANISSA WEIER, classmates of Peyton.
It's extremely disturbing as a parent and as a chief of police.
The will to carry out this attack means something is wildly amiss. That they would engage in that kind of activity and commit a really aggressive, heinous crime. That just doesn't happen without there being some A, red flag indicators, and B, an explanation for it of some type.
Even more frightening is why the girls did it. Apparently, they were influenced by something they saw online.
Keeping our children safe is more challenging now than in years past. The internet can also be full of dark and wicked things.
You said like a character or something? Or?
A character that is on several different websites.
Like a fictional character?
Yes.
Who was this fictional character? ANISSA and Morgan decide to open up to detectives, and they say things that no one saw coming.
There's this website called the Creepypasta Wiki. Okay. It's full of like horror stories that are meant to purposely scare you. And there's one of them called Slender Man.
Slender Man, the mysterious and unsettling horror character depicted as a faceless, elongated figure with multiple tendrils dressed in a dark suit. Although they're in separate interrogation rooms, both Morgan and ANISSA provide the same motive for trying to kill Peyton, or whom they called Bella.
He has these proxies, or servants, as people call them, and Morgan said, "Hey, ANISSA, we should be proxies." And I was like, "Okay, how would we do that?" She said, "We have to kill Bella."
Okay. Okay, and do you know why she said that? Like, why she said that?
Because we had to supposedly prove ourselves worthy to Slender.
How many times do you think you stabbed her?
I don't know. It happened very quickly. all I heard was screaming. I said, I'm sorry. This had to happen. And she was like, why? And then I said that it was necessary. I can't explain why.
According to the girls, during a slumber party, they lured Peyton out to the woods to play a game, but really intended to murder her. They claim that if they didn't do this for Slender Man, he would kill them and their families.
We think we see him sometimes.
Okay.
Like when we were walking up to where we were going, I saw him out of the corner of my eye on this side.
Okay.
And then Morgan said she heard a twig crack when no one was moving.
So I think there's no question that Slender Man and their belief in Slender Man played a role in their decision-making on that day. Even the victim was able to say that during the time she was friends with Morgan, Morgan was quite obsessed with Slender Man.
I believe at the time they did think it's either kill Peyton or our family's going to be killed by this Slender Man.
In fact, after the stabbing, the girls walked about 5 hours before they were found. Where were they headed?
Slender has this big mansion that all the creepypastas supposedly live in.
Because she wanted to walk to Slender.
Morgan and Anissa aren't like other 12-year-olds. Morgan would be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and Anissa with delusional disorder and depression.
When you put two people together that have these, mental challenges, they can feed off each other. And I think the fact that you had two 12-year-olds who both had some mental disorders, they really connected. And when they're connected together like that, everything becomes more real.
Is this a case of mentally ill, confused children who didn't know what they were doing? Or rather, an excuse for a meticulous, cold, premeditated act? After all, the girls discussed this attack on Peyton for months beforehand.
The fact that this was so incredibly premeditated over a 6-month period of time makes the whole thing even more shocking. One of the plans was to actually duct tape her mouth so she couldn't make any noise and then stab her at a sleepover. And the reason they didn't do that is they had skated and been out that evening and they were tired.
A search of GEYSER's home revealed more. There were internet searches for how to get away with murder and what kind of insane am I? And then there was the matter of what was found in Morgan's room.
The Barbie dolls and the notebooks and the drawings, they're so dark and they're intense and they're disturbed. There were so many signs. It really looked like what she was reading about, drawing, just sort of a precursor to what was going to happen.
There are parts of Morgan and Anissa's stories that appear to line up.
The last thing she said to me was, I trusted you. And then she said, I hate you. Saying stuff like, I hate you guys, I'll never forgive you, and I trusted you.
Yet when it came to who's actually the mastermind and stabber, they pointed the finger at one another.
Anissa told me we had to.
Why?
Because she said that he'd kill our families.
So back in December or January, Morgan told you, like, hey, we should be proxies, type thing.
Yeah. Morgan and I were also debating on who does the deed. At first it was me, but like I said, I was too squeamish and said, no, you do it. Morgan jumped on top of Bella and started stabbing her repeatedly, and that's when I turned around because I couldn't stand to see that. And then we said that we were going to play hide and seek, and then Anissa jumped her.
Who stabbed her first?
I think Anissa stabbed her first, and then I continued, and then she was like, Morgan, make sure she doesn't escape, and then it was like, Anissa said that she'd go get help. I didn't have anything to do with the lying, well, that was all Anissa.
They did blame each other in terms of their perception of what happened and how it happened. I think they both were just trying to be honest, but they were also both quick to say, it wasn't just my fault, I didn't do this part, she did that part.
When we come back, we're going to take a further look into the minds of these girls.
And then I didn't know what I did. It sort of just happened. It didn't feel like anything. It was like air.
So, did you think that you actually had to kill somebody to do it?
Yeah.
Like, for real? Okay.
Back in 2014, 12-year-olds Morgan GEYSER and ANISSA WEIER admit to police that they stabbed their classmate Peyton Leitner to appease the fictitious online character known as Slender Man. But is one more responsible for this than the other? And how exactly should they be punished? Morgan and ANISSA'S interrogation videos provided the first glimpse into what they were thinking. While both accounts were chilling, there were startling differences.
Morgan was cold. Morgan seemed completely unremorseful. Morgan seemed quite intelligent and quite manipulative. She seemed to really understand every single thing that was happening and had no guilt whatsoever for what she had done.
We were careless. I knew this would happen. I knew we'd get in trouble.
Why do you think it was your sleepover night that you're
Because we would all be together. It was a flawless plan, actually.
So she put the knife in your hand, and what'd you do?
I just continued to. You know what happened, didn't you?
ANISSA was a bit different. ANISSA came off as a 12-year-old child. She did express just a tiny level of remorse for the decision she had made.
The whole time, Peyton was screaming in agony. So we told her we were gonna get help, but we really weren't. We were gonna run and let her pass away.
You definitely have this feeling, I think, listening to those interviews, that Morgan was more responsible, that she was the one that actually did the stabbing, that they both said things that made it clear that they were in this together. They shared mental disorder, they shared loneliness, they shared obsession with, dark, scary things, and it's the combination of the two of them that created this event.
Morgan and ANISSA are charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. In 2016, after a lengthy legal battle making it all the way to the Court of Appeals, it's determined both defendants, who are then 14 years old, are to be tried as adults.
In this case, these two girls committed such a horrible crime that the view was they need to be punished. They tried to kill another 12-year-old.
The problem with civil court or juvenile court is that once a child turns 18, the courts don't have control over that child anymore. And the concern is that a 12-year-old at 18 may not be ready to be out on their own considering such a violent crime.
The prosecution of these two girls for attempted murder became a national story, with many appalled and in disbelief over the motive. Yet there were others who felt sympathy. The interrogations themselves ignited a ton of discussion.
They don't understand what it means to be interrogated necessarily. They don't understand how they say things, their body language, what they say can be used against them. And so I think there's an inherent unfairness.
Do I believe, regardless of my belief that a parent should have been there, that both of them understood their rights? I think there's no question that Morgan did. Morgan is, I assume, of incredibly high intellect. She understood every single thing that was going down that day. ANISSA, it's a bit less clear. Again, a child can understand those rights, but I think it's not quite as clear with ANISSA as it is with Morgan.
In 2017, ANISSA changes the game. She agrees to plead guilty to attempted second-degree murder, but she wants a trial to determine if her mental illness excuses her from being criminally responsible and ultimately from winding up behind bars.
The case against ANISSA and Morgan was overwhelming. But one thing that was also, as far as they were concerned, overwhelming was the evidence of her mental disease or defect. The prosecution thought that they had evidence to establish that the mental disease or defect did not have a huge impact on the decision-making of ANISSA and Morgan. Their position was that ANISSA didn't believe some of the issues regarding Slender Man until after the child had been stabbed.
A majority of the jury would end up agreeing with the defense and decided that even though this was a violent, planned-out crime, ANISSA shouldn't go to prison. Instead, they say she needs treatment.
So what they did find is by virtue of a mental illness or mental defect, she did not have the ability to know right from wrong.
You have to realize it wasn't just one doctor or two doctors that found that ANISSA had a mental health issue during the time that this crime happened. There was a third doctor. That third doctor was actually a doctor that was assigned by the court.
That very same month, Morgan follows suit. She pleads guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide. In this agreement, prosecutors don't fight the mental illness question. Instead, they resolve that she should remain at a psychiatric health facility.
Legally, she was not held responsible, and that's a good outcome for somebody who has committed this crime.
How long would Morgan and ANISSA be committed to an institution? ANISSA was up first, and at her sentencing, we learned new and eerie details about her from her family.
There were times during our conversations where she would look almost blank.
She's talked about going to school and becoming an advocate for children in her situation.
There have been times when she said, I don't know why I would have done this.
Of course, a judge wants as much information that's admissible or allowed to be shown before making a decision of this gravity. Now, having said that, there's a distinction in my mind between this is how she's acting, this is how she's helpful, versus the reality of mental health needs and treatment.
Before the judge rendered his sentence, we heard from ANISSA herself.
I do hold myself accountable for this, and that I will do whatever I have to do to make sure that I don't get any sort of delusion or whatever again. I want everybody involved to know that I deeply regret everything that happened that day. I'll do whatever I have to do to make sure that this doesn't happen. And I know you've heard that before and you're probably going to hear it again, but it's the truth. And I'm sorry.
I think those are great words, but when you have any type of mental health issues, there's a difference between thinking that, believing that, and saying that, and being willing and able to actually follow through with mental health treatment.
WEIER continues to believe that Slender Man is real. She also stated that as recently as July 2017, she believed that an evil spirit was pushing down on her bed after the spirit had been let out of a homemade Ouija board. She has continued to be easily influenced by peers. She has been convinced by another inmate who is a devil worshiper that her co-actor, meaning Miss GEYSER, is possessed. What's best for the community may not be what's best for ANISSA WEIER. As much as we can sit back and say, I will never do that again, and I think it's sincere, I'm not criticizing her for saying it, we don't know.
ANISSA was ordered to spend the next 25 years in a mental hospital.
You know, this judge recognized the seriousness of this crime. He also made it very clear that but for the grace of God, this child would have been dead.
2 months later, Morgan had her sentencing.
To let Ella and her family know I'm sorry. I never meant this to happen. I hope that she's doing well.
It was so interesting to see Morgan at her sentencing and how different she appeared than she had when she was first interrogated after the stabbing incident. She was more emotional, remorseful. Now, could that have been manipulation? Absolutely. But I took it to be real, sincere emotion for what she had done.
She sounded so childlike. I just feel like her maturity to accept and handle the consequences was different than presented by ANISSA.
The circumstances of the WEIER case are different than they were in this case. The biggest underlying difference is the long history of delusions. When she saw the Slender Man silhouette, she said she recognized that as a man who had visited her throughout the years when she was 3 or 4. She poses a significant risk of bodily harm to herself, others, or to property.
The judge sentenced Morgan to 40 years of institutional care.
Morgan seemed to take a stronger role in regards to what went down that day. And the judge may have just recognized that delineation along with the lack of remorse that she had shown all along.
At the time of this taping, Morgan's lawyers are appealing the case, arguing that she should never have been tried as an adult. Peyton Leitner has moved on with her life with plans to enter into the medical field, but that doesn't mean she's forgotten what happened, nor won't pay attention to what happens next. Legally, both Morgan and ANISSA can now petition every 6 months for conditional release from the hospital, with ANISSA'S case scheduled to be heard March 2021.
Here's the reason why I might consider early release. Number one, their behaviors while they're in the facility. Number two, their diagnoses and treatment plans. Are they capable of maintaining a treatment plan so that if they are released early, they can be expected not to commit another crime?
Both Morgan and ANISSA could eventually get out. Keep in mind that the judge has to make a determination as to how dangerous each of those individuals are in the community. One only needs to look back at the interview, particularly the interview of Morgan. Anyone who watches that video will never think it's safe to have this girl out of a mental health facility.
3 lives changed forever by one moment. It's a haunting story for many reasons, and it's one that could have resulted in something far worse. And with legal developments still up in the air, it's a story that's still being written. That's all we have for you on Prime Crime. Leave us your comments on the Slender Man stabbing on Facebook and Twitter with the hashtag PrimeCrime. As always, thank you for joining us, and until next time, be safe.